So the Southwest, let's start with Dallas because first team in terms of alphabetical order. Second, weird situation for them going into this offseason because this has potential to get to be a very, 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 very expensive team very quickly when I don't know how close they are to winning a title, despite the fact that they just made the Western Conference Finals. It feels so weird. Like every year we see one of these teams that make the conference finals. This year it was Atlanta, right? That decides essentially we need to run it back. We have all of this great success now. We're on the upward trajectory. Let's go. And Atlanta kind of fell on its face this year. I don't think Dallas is going to fall on its face because Luka Doncic is so talented and they have such a strong defensive infrastructure at this point. But they have difficult decisions to make this offseason that are going to complicate matters, I think.
For Dallas, I mean, I think the most difficult situation for them is actually not it's partially a decision on their front, but I think it's actually more a decision on Jalen Brunson's because Dallas, to walk people through, I'm not going to go into a ton of depth, but through their situation is that, yes, if they retain Jalen Brunson, and that's presumably not going to be on a one-year deal, they're going to go into the tax for the 22-23 season. And then they will, depending on how much Brunson gets paid, they will presumably be they'll be less expensive, but still expensive after that because Dwight Powell comes off the books. At some point, they'll have to figure, like a year later, they'll have to figure out what's going on with Bullock and Dinwiddie, and then maybe Bertans has a partial guarantee, pretty light one that can help clear that up. But so for Dallas, they should be very thankful that Mark Cuban is their owner because if he's willing to just pay the tax, which some teams have not, then that will make a lot of this more bearable. But there's a reason why Jalen Brunson might be the last highly regarded second round pick to get a 4-year deal because instead of being restricted and having match rights to wield to not only give you the ability to retain Jalen Brunson, but also to tamp down the market because teams aren't going to be super interested, he's unrestricted. And that means, I used to use other players, but now I'm going to use Jeremy Grant as the example here, where when a player hits unrestricted free agency, they can prioritize whatever they want. It is their prerogative, and I have full power to them. And so my instinct is that Jalen Brunson will and probably should, quote unquote, not that my opinion matters, stay in Dallas if the money is close. But if he wants something else, he can do that.
So I'm a little bit skeptical that Jalen Brunson is going to be there next year. And the only reason that I'm skeptical of that is because I understand why you make the Kristaps Porzingis deal at the deadline. I felt like they just needed a change, right? Like it felt like the Dallas Mavericks felt like they wanted to move out of that era. But I would think that a big part of that calculus was bringing in Spencer Dinwiddie in order to account for a potential Jalen Brunson departure, right? Like that gives you some level of insurance for if Jalen Brunson leaves in the offseason, you are set reasonably well, not incredibly well, because Spencer Dinwiddie at the time had been having a very poor season by his standards, but you feel like you have a road and a pathway toward having a replacement if Brunson leaves. Now, I would obviously prefer, if I was Dallas, to retain Jalen Brunson. I'm a little bit skeptical. Like I feel like there are teams that are going to offer him real starting point guard money with a real like role in that regard. Like Detroit can offer him a real legitimate starting opportunity next to someone like Cade Cunningham with more money. Like they're going to be able to pay more than Dallas does. I think at the end of the day, Dallas needs to be somewhat careful here in terms of what they offer, unless Cuban just decides, fuck it, we're giving Jalen Brunson $25 million. Like I'm skeptical that Mark Cuban is going to be like, let's pay Jalen Brunson 20, 25, $27 million a year. Because the thing that's going against Dallas here is that Jalen Brunson has a real case as being the best guard that can be attained this offseason, where there are real pathways toward getting him. And that's a tricky situation, I think, for Dallas.
It is, because it means there are going to be a lot of suitors and they'll be offering different things, whether that's playing time or even the role within it. And maybe it's location, maybe he's interested in that. And so you do run those risks. But what I always think about, this goes back to KD in these circumstances, is which what are the arguments if they prioritize different things that could win the day. And so what part of what helps Dallas here is that they're the best team with Jalen Brunson of any of the teams that could go there. So if that's
Yeah.
something that matters to him, then he can do that. And the other thing that they can offer theoretically is a fifth year. Maybe that's at a lower annual value. And there's a practical consideration, and it's good to have this in the first team because this will come up on the pods that I do on this, whether it's with you or not, is that the more common trend right now is to get your money, and then if you're not happy, find your new home after that.
Yeah.
And so I think it's possible that Brunson is intrigued by the Pistons, is intrigued by the Knicks, who just hired his dad as an assistant coach. But
and who have been recruiting him very publicly, it feels
very
like. I mean,
yeah.
People were talking about the Knicks brass sitting courtside for the Utah Dallas series, talking about it in regard to Donovan Mitchell. I feel like it was just as much for Jalen Brunson at the end of the day, if not more.
Could have been. And so, but let's say he's not thrilled by those, and Dallas is going to be relevant next year, whether they're a top tier championship contender or not, we'll have to see. And so as Brunson, if you like but don't love those as destinations, you could sign with Dallas, stick with them, and then a year or two from now, you can go and say, hey, I'd like to be somewhere else. They already have Spencer Dinwiddie, and that doesn't mean you're going to get exactly what you want, but if you think of those as like tier 2 or tier 3 options, then maybe you get your money. And it could be a similar story, not that we're going to do that team, but with Zach LaVine potentially, where the Bulls might be the best option that he has right now, but they might not be the best option he has forever.
Yeah, and the money part is interesting for Brunson because how does he maximize his future earnings is a real question here, right? I almost would prefer, I think, a 4-year deal if I was him, as opposed to a 5-year deal on lower money, because I would think just with the way he turns 26, I believe, in August. And I think he's going to be a little bit more, it's going to be easier for him to get another contract after this, coming off of it at 29 years old or 30 years old, if he can negotiate a 4-year deal with a player option on the 4th year, than on a 5-year contract with Dallas, right? Like that, maybe they can negotiate an ETO there after 3 years or something like that. There are different options. It's just, I don't know, man. It feels weird. There's just been so much smoke regarding Jalen Brunson, right? In large part because of the Knicks. The Knicks are hiring his father. They're sitting courtside at games. This is weird to me, but the Knicks aren't necessarily the best fit for him. I think Dallas is the best fit for him. And so much of it is not actually perpetrated, for a word, I guess. I don't even know if perpetrated, but so much of this smoke is not actually being done by Jalen Brunson. It's being done by people who are trying to get Jalen Brunson out of Dallas. But it just feels like there's a lot there to me. It's a bizarre situation that I can't wrap my head around.
It is bizarre, and it's hard to predict. And from Dallas's perspective, they have the problem that if he leaves, whether that's through a sign and trade and they get a trade exception or not, Dallas won't have cap space to replace him. They're preliminarily over the tax line even without Jalen Brunson. They could probably get under it if they really needed to, if that's where you're going, but replacing him is difficult. And it's a thorny spot. And that's why for Dallas, you might honestly be more comfortable over if money is a determining factor, overpaying him a little bit because you don't want to lose the asset. That's sort of a concept. And you could argue, and I would, that is a win-win circumstance because Jalen Brunson would get more money than he might otherwise. And Dallas, you get a good player for now, and maybe it's not forever, but maybe it is forever. Who knows?
Yeah, that's true. Other notes here, Maxi Kleber and Dwight Powell, I believe, are extension eligible here.
Kleber has a non-guarantee, but they'll pick that up, and then he is extension eligible.
Yeah, I would probably look to extend Maxi. I thought he was terrific. They have already extended Dorian Finney-Smith He is on a deal that makes a lot of sense. This team is going to get Tim Hardaway Jr. back next year, who's someone they did not have in the playoffs. I feel like this team, if they lose Jalen Brunson, just looks very, very different. And then Dallas is going to have to figure out how to operate on the margins beyond that. How do they replace Jalen Brunson? How do they, build without him in the core? It's a tricky subject, I feel like.
Especially because the Mavericks are asset poor at the moment. Like, they already owe some picks, and they don't have this arsenal of young players that aren't playing for them. Like those assets, and that means that your downside risk is pretty significant in that circumstance. But they do have Luka, so hope is that he will continue to grow.
Yeah, this is the biggest example of why getting big decisions right gives you such an enormous marginal advantage. Having Luka Doncic on your team for the next 5 years makes your life incredibly easy. It doesn't make it easy, but it makes it incredibly easier, maybe is the better way to put it.